Warning: the video you are going to watch now is part of a thesis and an essay. Almost nothing that will be said has the official signature of astronomical science. So, when it comes to new and purposeful ideas, you can include this video in the field of science fiction. The author. When you watch some videos that deal with astronomical topics and come into contact with the concepts of future light cone of an event, with the concept of black holes and the redshift of light, your head seems to go into a spin. Scholars say that this problem stems from being laypeople on the subject. However, the difficulty is much more in convincing the spectator to accept what is being imposed on him, since many of these themes remain in the abstract terrain, as is the case with the black hole. Nobody has seen one of them, and probably never will, because one of their characteristics is to retain light and time. Time, as we know, is the basic tool for applying Newton's laws, starting with the definition of the concept of instantaneous velocity of a particle. Likewise, in the absence of time there are no accelerating waves, just as there are no measurable forces. To top it off, our own memory depends on time. So, for all intents and purposes, there is only what can be remembered. Taking into account our points of view, let's use some established concepts of modern physics and try to lean them against the wall. If the argument uses Bayes' logic and not just mathematics, the spectator may be convinced, since we were not given a head just to wear a hat. For starters, let's try to justify the Einstein's initial thought that, in principle, our universe would be static. For this, we will use the concept of a cone of light of the future of any event. Stephen Hawking addresses this issue very clearly in his book A Brief History of Time. Let's look at the diagram on page 53 of the aforementioned book. What we read in the diagram: the death of the sun does not strike us immediately, because we are not in its future light cone. It is understood that space could not directly communicate to us the event of the death of the sun. That is, it needs this to be done by a messenger, which, in this case, is the light of the star, whether it is present or not. Furthermore, it would be necessary for someone to be able to interpret the informations that light carries, or they would be lost in the void of space. That someone is the isolated and conscious observer, represented by each of us. Even if the event, covered by your own future light cone, is a shining star, or an electron reflecting a beam of light, both will always be evaluated outside of their own time. This is predicted by the uncertainty principle. Thus, it can be said that the observer could only interact with the universe if he had a memory, or after the aforementioned information was projected into his own past. As you can see, the retention of time in our future would be shifting the ground zero of time from the position of the event to our position on Earth. It does not matter if this would happen in a virtual way or not, as it would result from the principle of exclusion of direct access to the interior of the future light cone at the event. The truth is that, due to the retention of time, the space messenger would be virtually leveling out in the process. That is, the maximum and minimum energy levels of the scattered light would have to start from the same moment in time, which would polarize this light. polarizing means, for example, placing ultraviolet and infrared at opposite ends of the light spectrum and dangerously close to each other, even without touching. From certain levels of polarization, time cannot be measured, causing the illuminated particles to disappear, even though they remain there. It is that, without measurable time, there is no movement, as predicted in the concept of instantaneous velocity of a particle. For it to go under relative motion, it is necessary to measure the position of the particle in more than one time. If time cannot be measured in our future, it is fair to conclude that, in the previous dimension of time, and even second order, the universe would be stationary. It could not be determined whether this would occur only in a virtual field, or in the de facto field, due to the impossibility of directly accessing the future-like cone of events. Indirect estimates of time, made using the speed of light from the distant source after its scattering from Earth, have no scientific support. They would result from an extrapolation of concepts developed late towards our future. Another conclusion that would become acceptable, in view of placing the zero point of time in the position of the isolated observer, would be that time would be contained within ourselves. That is, time would not exist outside the observer. Then, all events that might require time in the future, and that would describe through the scattered light, would be revealed outside their own time, or after the necessary decoding of the reports, by our memory. This includes the limited speed of light, and the Doppler effect. Taking into account that a universe without time would be static in principle, one could not prove the existence of waves moving inside the future-like cone of any event. Thus, it would be impossible to say that the light of a distant star, which we see projected in the celestial vault at night, would have moved in space at an earlier time. In fact, light would always have been at our entire disposal on Earth, allowing it to be traced only in the direction of our past. One of the characteristics of starlight and cosmic radiation as a whole is that, in order to be seen by the observer, they would need to undergo a process of condensation or packing. This process is easily detectable in quantum mechanics, and at the subatomic level of matter, corresponding to the quantization of energy. That is, a particle, such as an electron, cannot be found between two quantized levels, which restricts the particle's number of orbits. However, the fundamental issue is that the quantization process does not take time. During quantum scattering, the light packet, photon, is delivered ready to the observer. This is one of nature's mysteries. In fact, the quantum system operator does not see the particle directly, but the light scattered by it. This light is the tool used to indirectly measure its position or speed. As even subatomic particles have a future-like cone, to which one would not have direct access, this would result in positional uncertainty, and allow the unification of macro and macrostructure, at least when it comes to observation. It does not matter how far the light travels before the photon scatters, or the time that would have been spent in its previous displacement, because there is no before the scattering of this light. In the but before, there would be a timeless and stationary universe. This explains why you look up at the night sky and see all the stars instantly. The same is true when you look at a preparation under a microscope. In any case, quantization would be the key to explaining why, even being static, the universe could not manifest itself to the observer before the scattering of light or outside of space-time. Everything that exists, from our point of view, would already be found in our past. That is, for those who depend on a memory, there is only what can be remembered. Returning to Stephen Hawking's diagram, it is noted that the drawing touches the virtual leveling of light in our future, a statement that is not supported by physics. Is that, to better describe the event of the future light come at the death of the Sun, Hawking assumes that our star would behave as a point center, emitting circular and concentric light waves. If, as the waves were moving away from the source, all with the same speed, we added the one dimension of time, the superposition of the waves would form a three-dimensional cone of light. Although it is not written in the diagram, it is assumed that the cone formed would be straight. A right cone would result from the rotation of the right triangle on one of its legs. The base of the cone, thus formed, is a perfect circle. The source, Sun, would always remain on the vertex of this cone, while, theoretically, the light waves would be superimposed over time. What think of a form of light leveling in this model? Because the aforementioned waves would be circular and concentric. If the photons performed in a circular orbit, due to the constant velocity and acceleration which characterize this movement, there would be no real separation between the maximum and minimum energy levels of light. This illusion is reflected in the apparent circular orbit of the Earth, which the observer extrapolates to the image of the Sun, not to the Sun itself, moving on the ecliptic.